All right, open up your terminal. Navigate to wherever you do your programming work, so your workspace, wherever you do that, just navigate to that spot. If you haven't signed up here yet, do that right now. You can click on Login and click Sign Up. It's free, so go ahead and do that now if you haven't already. If you have, we do need to install a couple Gulp modules. So the first thing we want to install is Gulp. Install a couple NPM modules. First thing we want to install is a Gulp, so go ahead and install that. It's going to ask for your password. Just type in your password. Okay, everyone good with that? I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name? Yang. Nice to meet you. Next thing, install is Webpack. Make sure these are global installations. Okay, last but not least is the Turbo CLI. Let's go ahead and install that. Turbo CLI is essentially your liaison to your deployment environment. So when you write local source code and you want to connect it to your project on Turbo, the CLI does that for you.
Sorry, what was right before Turbo CLI?
Webpack. So this, hold on. This right there. Okay. Everyone make sure you have this Turbo CLI installed by doing this. Turbo version. It should give you a version number, the most updated version. Okay, so make sure you have this version. So John, you should do this too, even though you already have it. Do it anyway. And then you do need to log in via the CLI, so do turbo login. And it's going to ask for your email password and go ahead and log in using the account you created a few minutes ago. Okay, so I'm going to CD to my desktop. I'm just going to do this whole thing over there. In this project, we're going to make a very, very simple Instagram client, basically for the purposes of experiencing React. So we're going to render a component that fetches an Instagram API endpoint and renders the data within a React context. Okay, that's pretty much it. And then we'll see how much time we have left, and we'll build more on top of that. So, amongst other things, what the Turbo CLI provides you is a scaffolding tool for creating React projects in addition to just basic projects. So we're going to use a React scaffold. Okay, so let's go ahead and create a new project. Specifying the React flag, meaning we want to use the React scaffold. Okay. Yes.
Sorry, I have an issue with the password for Turbo. I, for some reason, get like a message error file found.
Did you create an account here?
No. Oh, actually.
Yeah, you have to create an account here. Yeah. Just create an account, right? And then when you log into Turbo, then go to the home page. You can also create an account down here. I'll fix that. That's my fault. So you can create an account down here.
Oh, cool. Thanks.
Okay, so here we're creating a React scaffolded project. Go ahead and do that. To be very clear, this is a conventional Node Express project. So there's nothing underneath the hood that's unconventional. Okay, we're just scaffolding standard architecture to save time. So I've been doing professional React development for over a year now, and every time I start a new project from scratch, the entire setup typically takes around 45 minutes once you configure all the Redux architecture as well. So that's another reason why I built Turbo, was to cut that part out of the process. Okay, so this is a full React and Redux architecture. Okay, that being said, obviously we should go through it so you understand the pieces and how they connect. But that's what the scaffold does for you. So, do they teach Node and React at Galvanize? Okay, so it's a Node project, right? And do you know Node at all? Okay, so given that it's a Node project, you need to install the dependencies, right? So the first thing we want to do is cd into it. So cd into your project, just like that, and run the npm install. So we're going to install from the package.json, we're going to install the dependency. So it's very, very conventional Node, Node Express. Okay, while that's going, this normally takes about 60 to 2 minutes, 60 seconds to 2 minutes. Here's to project. Open it up in Sublime so that while the installs are going, we can explore the architecture. Okay, so again, here we have a very, very basic Node Express environment, right? You got your package.json for where you declare your dependencies, all that stuff. The views are your templates, your mustache or handlebars, whatever you like to use, or Jade or Pug, whatever templating engine you prefer. Here in the SRC, this is where the React project is. Okay, the SRC directory is where your React and Redux environment exists. So the entire React Redux architecture exists inside the SRC folder. Now, if you look at the index.js within the SRC, you will see that this is where the React code entry point is written. Okay? So your React code begins here. It's where your entry point is defined, I should say. Okay? So let's get rid of all this commented out code. If you look at line 15, or my line 15, right here, the last line of this file, you'll see document get element by ID root. So the way React works is it does what's called client-side rendering. What that means is that when the source code loads, it then finds this div element called root, or whatever we want to call it, and it injects the UI inside that div element. That's client-side rendering. Angular 1 works the same way. Okay, so the UI renders after the source code loads. That makes sense? So the question then becomes is where does the source code load? So that loads over here inside the views directory, index.mustache. So you'll see here we have it on line 6, div ID equals root. So that is where the UI will be injected when this page loads from the React standpoint, okay? And the actual React source code in this file is lines 12 and 13, okay? What we do is we write the code which eventually compiles into this output. Okay, that's where we write our React code. The actual compilation process is dictated by Webpack, which uses what's called Babel to transpile the code. That's the mechanic, the plumbing behind all this, okay? So first thing we want to do right here, by now your installation should be done. So we're going to do turbo dev server. Head over to localhost 3000. And you now see the React code being rendered on the index.mustache, right? If you actually look at the source code here, you'll see that all that HTML you were just looking at doesn't show up here, right? That's because it's doing what I described earlier, client-side rendering. The HTML is being injected into the root after the bundle loads. Does that make sense? So you'll see the actual HTML, it's very, 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 very bare. It's very primitive, right? So here's our React code. Those two lines right there, once it loads, it then injects inside the root whatever code we want. Going back to our SRC index right here, that's all of this right there. It doesn't look like a lot, but all the UI we were just looking at is right there. So let's get rid of that intro. And let's inject our own UI, right? So hello React. All right. So now I want to see that instead. Okay. I want to confirm that I now control the UI. Okay. So everyone do the same thing. However, when I reload the page, nothing's going to happen. It's still the same thing, and the same should happen on your end, which is to say nothing. Nothing should happen. So the problem is React is a compiled source code. We have to now compile the new source code and then reload. That's done through Webpack. Okay? So right now what we're going to do is go over here, open a new tab through Command-T, and just run Webpack. And now Webpack will recompile the React source code into the revised version, what we just changed. You should see a bunch of green lines like this, which means the compilation worked, which means hopefully when I reload now, I see what I expect to see. Okay, that's the fundamental workflow of a React project. Okay, does that make sense? Also, some of this might be like review for you. So if I'm going too slow, let me know. We can just blast past this if you want. So let me know if this is too easy or too fast. But that's the process. Okay. Do you have a question?
Yeah. What was the command to load the blog post?
Oh, turbo dev server. Right there. Okay, so what I've done here is I've confirmed that I now control the UI. I can now begin my programming. What you didn't do is set up all the mechanics of a React project. We saved a lot of time in the scaffold, which is nice. It saves a lot of time. However, that doesn't mean you shouldn't understand how it does work. So that's important. So right here is our entry point. React projects consists of a series of what's called components. Components are like Lego pieces that you put together to create your UI. Or if you look at this table layout, you can think of each one of these as components. And you bring them all together to create your web UI. So what you want to do in a React project is create a series of components that come together like a Lego piece, like a Lego set, to create your UI. Okay, so we're doing it like this, although like what I did right here, lines 10 through 14. Although that works, it's poor form. This is not good architecture. So you want to create a component, okay? So let's go ahead and create another component. Let's go ahead and create a component. So go back here. If you look at the directory architecture, you'll see inside the src directory, we have a components folder. So that's where your components go, right? I think that's pretty intuitive. And then inside there, we have that intro component right here is what we were looking at a few moments ago. So we want to go in there and create our own components, okay? So let's go ahead and do that. So cd src components. Let's create a new component called Instagram feed. And that's going to be where we load our Instagram images, I guess, our feed. All right? So let's go ahead and do that. Change directory back to the root, because that's where you generally want to be. And inside our Instagram feed, let's begin programming. So here is where we do our imports and our rendering. We define our components. Let's go ahead and do that. So obviously we need to import React. For now, this should be it. So let's do this Instagram feed. This is the Instagram feed. Okay. Okay, so here we have a very, very simple component which renders one line of HTML text, which is right here on line 8. Obviously, this is the Instagram feed. And everything inside this return bracket is the component, is the visual definition of the component. So you can think of a component like a group of HTML that you just reuse everywhere. Okay, and that's what we're doing here. Obviously, components will get bigger and more sophisticated, but this is a bona fide component. So now we can use this component in anywhere we want to in our project. And this is fundamentally the React workflow. You define components, you use them over here, etc., etc. Okay?
Quick question.
Yep.
Sometimes they put export in front of the class. What's the benefit?
Oh, it's just whatever your preference. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, JavaScript kind of gives you a lot of rope to hang yourself. Is anyone here from a Ruby on Rails background? Okay, so Rails has a very strong convention-based architecture. They strongly impose conventions upon you. It's a very what's called opinionated framework, which has its pros and cons. If you're generally new to programming, it's a good thing. You learn best practice right away. JavaScript in general, and certainly Node Express, is like the complete opposite philosophy. They're just like, here you go, do whatever. If you mess up, it's on you. So it's kind of more like, it's more open in that sense. So I guess it really depends on kind of your personality and whether or not you like that versus, different people have different styles. So, okay, so now let's use this component. So we go back to our index in the src, right? And instead of the intro, we import the Instagram feed. I'm going to get rid of this provider. It won't come into play today, so I'm just going to get rid of it. And here, we're just going to render our Instagram feed component, and that's it. Okay, but if I reload the app right now, what's going to happen? Exactly. The answer is nothing because I got to recompile all the code, right? So if I reload the app right now, it's still what I had before, so I got to go back here and run Webpack again. Clearly, this can get a little bit cumbersome if you've got to remember to run Webpack all the time. So really what you want to do is run it with a watch flag like this and just leave it running. And Webpack will automatically recompile your code whenever it detects changes, okay? So just leave it running and just forget about it. Just let it do its thing, okay? So now it recompiled, and now here we go, all right? Now we're in business, all right? So, and notice how I'm just going to leave this on, okay?
Is it the same thing as the hot reload? If you just do the
No, hot reload's even like faster. Like whenever you make changes, it'll automatically reload the entire browser for you. I don't go that far. I just do it on my own. Okay, so we've now confirmed that we are loading our components, right? So now let's get started. So here, what we want to do is create some UI. Now inside this scaffold, we already have Bootstrap installed, so we're going to use that. So I'm going to use a Bootstrap class to create some very, very basic UI. Okay, the way the UI is going to work is we're going to have an input field, a text input, where you can type in a username of any Instagram user, press enter, and it'll load the feed. Okay, that's the UI we're going after here. Okay, so let's go ahead and set up that UI from a basic standpoint. So let's go ahead and do. Sorry if I keep on going back and forth, but let's do a two-column approach here. Left column, where we can enter the name. It'll be like a column, maybe 2 or 3, and then everything else will be the feed. Okay, so it's a standard Bootstrap row column grid architecture. So here, let's create our row. I'm kind of taking some things for granted. I'm sorry. So here. You notice I'm using class name rather than class, right? That's because we're not programming in HTML, although it looks like we are. We're programming in what's called JSX. JSX has slightly different conventions than HTML. It's like a 75% match, but the remaining 25% is what we're seeing here. You can't use class. You got to use class name. Okay. The reason is class is a reserved keyword in JavaScript, so that's the workaround. Okay.
Can you just hop to index.js for a second?
I'm sorry?
Index.js.
Index.js. Yeah, right here.
Oh.
Dan?
Yep.
So, did we have to somehow install Webpack? Because it's not really working on each.
Sure. Yeah, you want to install Webpack globally, so you do sudo npm -g Webpack. The -g is what you want to be sure about. It's a global installation, so just do it again. I'm going to pause the video, make sure everyone's caught up. Okay, so we're just going to create some basic rows and columns. So here, let's do, let's see. Let's do 3 and 9. Okay, and then inside the left column, let's set up a very, very basic input. So Let's make text, right? So class name. Let's use the Bootstrap class here. And let's create a placeholder username. Okay, go ahead and save that. And this time I do not have to rerun Webpack because I have it on the watch state. So it should automatically recompile. So if I go back to my Webpack window, you'll see that it recompiled down here. This is the recompilation. Okay? So if I reload the app now, there it is. Okay? Good? Okay, I'm going to create some I tend to be a little picky with the aesthetic, so I'm going to go back to my here, and I'm just going to give it a background color. So here, notice by the way here, I'm in raw HTML. So I got to switch back into HTML mode. This is sort of a hazard of reactive elements, like you kind of forget which one you're in, and it just sort of, you have to like switch back and forth, so it happens a lot.
When you say this one was called
JSX. I forget the exact like what it stands for. It's like JavaScript extension or something like that. Yeah. Okay. Where were we? Okay, so here, let's say H4. Let's say enter username. How's that? Okay. And then now we need a button to actually trigger the request, right? To invoke the request. So let's just throw a button in right here. And then get Instagram posts. Okay, so that's going to be our UI for now. Everyone with me on that?
Could we go back to Instagram feed?
Yep.
Yes. Yes.
I'm going to continue doing some basic styling here. Again, we are using Bootstrap, so may as well take advantage of that. Success.
How is it included by default? Is it part of React?
Oh, the scaffold. So inside my scaffold, I just put in a bunch of basic tools like jQuery, Bootstrap, stuff that everyone uses, so that we don't have to I don't have to burn 20 minutes of demo on that. Like just that alone would burn 30 minutes of a demo. I've done enough of these demos. Like everyone has Bootstrap. Let's just get on with it. So unless you don't, I'm happy to stop and explain it to you. So let me know if that's the case. But just about every demo I do, people have a certain level of knowledge already. So. I'm all about saving time. It's precious seconds of the day. You gotta make the most of it. Okay, so here, some basic UI. Now I want to create a little bit of padding between the button and the input. All right. So the reason I'm doing that is to show you how to do styling in JSX, which is also very unorthodox. So here, what I'm going to do is create a style, and normally what you would do is this, right? And if I want to create some margin on top. That's what you normally do. Do not do that. That will break the build, okay? So what you really, in JSX, what you want to do is you want to do this. Okay, that's how you do the same thing in JSX, okay? Notice how there are no units of measurement. That's because px is the default. Okay, so px is implied, all right?
I put it in sometimes it's kind of like
Oh yeah, whatever.
It doesn't actually break it, but it's nice.
Okie dokie. So now we have obviously some very primitive UI. We're good to go. Let's go ahead and set up what's called the state. Okay, so React in general revolves around the concept of what's called state. This is the most important concept of React. Essentially, what you need to understand with regard to React is that all components literally react to changes in state. Okay? So the name React is named that way for a reason. It's not like a fancy term. It actually is descriptive of what it's supposed to do. So components respond to changes in state, and then it re-renders. So what we're going to do right now is set up the state. We want to organize that state. Let's do that right now. Okay, and there's the state. Right now there's nothing in it, but whatever we insert in the state will determine how the UI is rendered. Okay? That's the fundamental concept of React. Okay? Now why are we setting up state here? Whatever the user enters in here, I want to track in the state. I want to track it somewhere. So the first thing we need to do is set up a function, a callback function on the input to trigger every time the user types anything. So that's going to be through an onChange. Just update username. Okay, so you'll see right here on line 19, I'm calling a function called update username, which the function doesn't exist. So this is going to crash. So just be aware of that. So what we're going to do is define this function. Okay, right here. So every time I type a letter into the input, it's going to call this function. Let's go ahead and define the function. Okay, now it'll work. Now what we really want to do is we want to capture the values that are being typed into the input, right? Obviously, otherwise what's the point? So that's going to be entered through an event argument. And then we can just console log that as well. And then we can just literally visually see what's being typed into, all right? I made a handful of changes. That means Webpack should have recompiled. It did. That means we're good to go. So if I reload the page now, this time I want to open my console, right? And I should see letters typed in as I do that, which I do. That means the callbacks were successfully registered. Okay? So how's that? We're moving kind of at a brisk pace, so let me know if it's not working or whatever.
I'm just having trouble getting the server to get up and running.
Oh, the server, okay. What happens when you run the server?
I get a message that says usage, node_mon, and then in brackets node_mon options, script.js, args, see node_mon help.
Okay, so we are now capturing the text being entered into the text field, which is great, obviously. So now what I want to do is I want to keep that text inside the state. Right? We need to store it somewhere, and the state is a pretty intuitive choice for that. So I want to set the state username equals whatever the value is of the text being entered. Okay. Okay, and then just to illustrate what I mean by the component reacts to changes in state. Let's illustrate that right now. So every time I type a letter into here, the state is changing, right? But we're not doing anything about it. So even though those reactions are happening, there's no difference, right? So what we want to do is I'm going to console log a render right here and get rid of this, just to show that every time the state changes, that render gets recalled. Okay, that's just to illustrate when these events take place, because not truly understanding this can lead to a lot of problems. So you see how render is being called every time I make a change in state, right? Does that make sense? And something else I can do is, let's say, red, blue, every time this render gets called, we can grab the username. I'm going to set an initial state here, just so we have a default value. Okay? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the color from that colors map. This state username, which may not exist, right? We only have 3 colors defined. So the default, we're just going to go with white. That's the hex code for white. I kind of moved a little faster, but do you guys see what I'm doing? I'm just grabbing the color from the colors map based on whatever the username is, which that color might not exist, so the default value is white. That's the thought process that took place there. And then what that means is I can take this container and have the container background color react to changes in state. This is a more typical application of a React component, having it react to changes in state. So if I check in on Webpack right now, it's still building, which is good. And then if I reload, right, it's white. So if I do RED, you see that? Reacts to changes in state. Does that make sense? GREEN. It just reacted to the change. BLUE. That's react. It's reacting. Okay. So I think I've clearly conveyed that out. Does that make sense? All right. So I'm going to get rid of this now. I cannot overemphasize how important it is to understand that cycle of events. That is the fundamental defining characteristic of a React project. Okay, your UI reacts to changes in state. Okay, that's the last time I'll say it, but I just want to really make sure you understand that point in tonight's demo. So now let's do what we all came here to do. So this button, the green button down here, is where we trigger the request, right? So let's connect a function to this, which will invoke the request. So let's do onClick. Fetch feed, how's that? That's good. Okay, same thing, right? This is a function that doesn't exist, so we have to define it, same thought process. Let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to grab this console log. We're going to do fetch feed. Now, the thing to remember here on line 25 is that at this juncture, we have the current value of the input field stored in the state. That's the important thing to remember. So here we can do this .state.username. And for now, that's it. We just want to make sure we actually do have it stored because we might have made a silly mistake somewhere along the way. All right, so let's go ahead and try it. Cool, so you should see that. That's very important. Make sure you see that. Same as before. Give me like a thumbs up if you're where I am. All right, so we need a couple of seconds here. Let me just pause the video.
Just go create this file.
Yeah.
And just working with the front end application.
So you mean like go through
Yeah, just
the
like-
creating that?
If you give like 5 minutes, you're gonna have a problem.
Okay, I'll just sort of articulate where we are right now. So right now we've confirmed that the username has been successfully captured in the state, which means we can now make requests, right? Let's use let's all start out with the same Instagram feed to cover for any possible inconsistencies, right? That way we can be guaranteed that there is data there. Okay, because oftentimes you'll have a feed that's private, something like that, or it doesn't exist, or it's deprecated, or whatever. Let's make sure none of that happens, right? So here's my YMCA. right? We're going to use this as our sample feed, okay? Got it? So Instagram has sort of an undocumented API where you can make JSON requests like this, and this is giving you a JSON version of the same Instagram account, okay? The query string is underscore, 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 A equals 1, okay? And this will give you the Instagram feed of the specified username in addition to like some basic profile metadata, okay? So we're going to use this as our sort of our sample API.
You know,
Yeah.
just could paste your Instagram account.
Okay, so now that begs the question, how do we even make an API request from this project base? So for now, if we go back here, the fetch feed where we click that button, that's where the API request has to happen, correct? So right here, for now, we're going to hard code the URL. In other words, we're going to ignore whatever the user types in for now because we want to standardize the feed so we can guarantee we get data, right? Let's do a URL. Let's just paste this in for now like that. Now, what would be nice is if we can make an API request directly from this component to the Instagram service. However, that will not work because of what's called cross-origin request restrictions. So we're going to have to set up our own backend to make the request on our behalf and then return it to our client side. So luckily, this project is already prepared to do that. So if you go to this roots folder, right now we're going to swing over to the back end and create a very simple route, a route to make API requests. Okay, so if we go back here and head over to the routes directory, let's create an Instagram route. Okay, now we're now creating API routes. So this is not React, this is just regular Node Express now. Okay, so what we're going to do is open up the API.js and copy the whole thing. We're just going to get some initial scaffold and paste it into the Instagram route. Okay, get rid of the second one because we don't need it. And right here where it says colon resource, we're going to do colon username. The colon means it's a parameter. It's basically a variable. Okay. And for now, this route will do nothing more than just return the username right back to us. Okay, so right here on line 10, we're just spitting the username right back out. We're taking it in, spitting it right back out. Okay, just to confirm visually whether or not this works. Okay, everyone got that? Kind of moved at a little bit of a, that was more of a third gear pace, so let me know if you didn't get that.
When we use params, it means that we grab this data from our URL.
Correct, which we're going to do in a few seconds. So if we go to our app.js over here, we now want to integrate that new route. So we just import the route, and we define what's called the path down here on line 14. So now we've imported the route and defined the path with which we can invoke the route. This is pure backend programming. That's nothing to do with React. Okay? So now what I can do, hopefully, if I didn't make any mistakes, is go back here and run the dev server. Right? Grab this username and then go to localhost/Instagram/ the username, and there it is. See what I mean by just spits it right back out? Right? Takes it in, spits it right back out. That's it for now. And just like you said, Max, it takes it from the URL and just returns it right back to us. Which means this route has been successfully connected. Okay? So now that we've confirmed that, we can now make the actual Instagram request, proxying it through our server so we don't have to worry about those CORS issues. Okay, so we're basically setting up like a proxy server that'll just make Instagram requests for us. So let's do that. So over here, over here is where we make the Instagram request. So turn off your server, and we're going to install an npm module in order to do that. That's going to be called super agent. So npm is super agent. And super agent will make the request on our behalf. Okay. A lot of people like Fetch or Axios, or it's all the same. This is what I prefer. So if you like your library better, go for it. I'm using super agent. Yep.
Just sorry, bringing on you. You said that at the end tomorrow, this evening, you just upload all this class to the website.
Yeah, probably by lunchtime tomorrow. I'll have to like
Cool.
edit the video and process it and all that
Because
stuff.
I think late with all this stuff.
Okay, so make sure you have super agent installed. Thanks for coming, Sam. And then we're going to use that to make the request to Instagram. Okay. So, does everyone have that?
You just go back to app.js for a sec.
App.js.
What were the changes that you made?
Oh, lines 9 and 14. Yeah, Max, you should just observe in that case, okay? Because it gets hard to catch up after a while.
I'll walk you through it.
What's important to recognize here is that you are doing very plain vanilla Node Express programming. Okay? The environment you're using here is highly conventional, just Node Express. Okay? So there's no weird conventions that are forced upon you, nothing of that sort. You're just doing regular Node Express application. All right? The reason I strongly emphasize that is because I find a lot of frameworks and libraries make you do things a certain way, like their way. A good example is like Firebase. Anyone here used Firebase before? So Firebase has a very customary set of APIs that you have to get used to that only work within the context of Firebase. Does that make sense? And that's called lock-in. You're kind of forced into what they're going to do, and it keeps you committed to their environment. God forbid they ever change stuff or deprecate a library. That just ruins your whole day, if not more. All right, how are we on this? So now we've confirmed that this endpoint works. Let's go ahead and import the super agent module. And here, let's make that request. So super agent get query set, and I'm going to pass in null for the query. Just takes JSON return, and the end. This is obviously the callback, which takes a error and response. Okay, make sure you comment out our initial response because we're not going to use that anymore. Here, be aware that there might be an error, right? Like the username might not exist. So you want to check for the error. And just throw back an error message to debug. Okay, and then here, the response is packaged inside of that body key, which super agent does for us. Okay. Now you may have noticed on line 9, I removed the URL. There is no URL, so that's obviously problematic. So go back to the component where we're using it and grab the URL. And just for now, insert that constant URL using the same username every time for now. Okay? And then we'll make it variable later. All right, and I may as well just do this right now. I'm gonna separate this out as a variable. It's just better that way. So we're going to do it like this, const URL, like that. Okay, so now SuperAgent is making the request we made a few moments ago to the Instagram API. Now SuperAgent is going to do that for us and simply return the data on line 23 right back to the client, assuming we didn't make any mistakes. Okay? Always a dubious assumption, but if things go right, this should return the Instagram feed that we saw about 10 minutes ago. So let's go ahead and confirm that. So going back here, let me just get my dev server running again. Right? And then here is what it did a few minutes ago. If I reload this endpoint, I'm now seeing the API feed from Instagram loaded on our project. You see how it says localhost 3000? Right, it's not the Instagram website, it's our website grabbing the Instagram request. And this will take care of our cores issues. This will resolve that problem. Okay, so here's the code for that. Make sure you have that working.
So what just came out, that was response not body? Like this whole
Correct. Right here on line 23 is where that's happening. All right, so how's it going? Thumbs up, thumbs down. So a couple more minutes.
Oh, so are we keeping the rest.json with the confirmation and username in the code?
Can you give me a line number?
It was on line 26, but it follows the res.json response.body.
No, there should only be one res.json.
Okay.
How did you test it on localhost? Which did you copy just from 14th Street?
Yep, this is the local host test I ran.
But without the API?
Correct, because it is now our endpoint. And then be aware, what you put over here doesn't even matter. It's going to return the same thing every time, right? Because we're hard coding it for now for the sake of testing. So that's why we're doing that. Now what's nice is that since this is all the same code base, we can use the same SuperAgent library on the React side to make this request to our backend, which is exactly what we're going to do next. So are we ready to move? Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to copy this right now. Right there, you see that? Let's head over back to our Instagram feed component, and right here is where we want to make that request. Right here. Right? But don't forget, we have to import SuperAgent. It's the same idea. We're going to import the NPM modules. It's really the same process. So import SuperAgent. Except spell it right. Okay. Okay, so now we have that. And then in here, we can make a request to that endpoint. Right? But keep in mind the URL is now our URL. So it's going to be /Instagram/14th Street, or really the username from the state. Like that. Do you see how we're now leveraging the endpoint we just wrote to service our own React code base? Okay? And these res.jsons will not work because that's a node express concept. So here, all we're going to do is console logs just because. So console log error. And then here, console log feed. Okay, so now we are making the request from our component to the endpoint that we just wrote to bypass the whole CORS issue, which is always a nuisance.
Do we still use promises here?
These actually aren't promises; they look like promises, though. What's happening is that this call right here is returning an object, which we then append right here, returns the object, it does it again here, then it returns the object. That's where we invoke it.
Okay.
So it looks like a promise, but it's actually not. It's very misleading. Okay, so where were we? So here, we just made some changes to the React code. So check in on Webpack. Oh, I didn't even run Webpack, right? So nothing would have worked just now unless I checked in on Webpack. So just go ahead and run Webpack. All right, cool. Let's try it out. So here we have our dev server still running. So now let's go back to localhost. It doesn't really matter what we put here. Call the function, and there is our Instagram feed. You guys see that? All right. So 14 street wide, dead end, community center, whatever. So that means it worked. Right now we have data going into our component. Okay. Give me a thumbs up if you got this working. This is clearly sort of the pivotal point of the demo, right? Now we have Instagram data loading into our component. I should be very clear right now. The way I set this up is very, very far from best practice. I'm taking a lot of shortcuts for the sake of time, just to show you how the pieces work, but I don't want you to think this is how a well-architected professional code base would be. That is just not the case. Okay? I'm just getting the pieces to work for the sake of this demo. There's always that disclaimer. I don't want people to be like, well, Dan Kwan taught it this way. Like, no, just, we've got 2 hours. I want to make sure we get through what we get through. So.
Yeah, mine works. I'm just getting the error. Can you just go back to Instagram feed?
Yep, all the actions right here, lines 23 through 33.
Res.json. Yeah, actually, I like that. So sweet.
Let's sort of conceptualize from a React standpoint how we're going to process all this data, right? Obviously, we need to process the data to do something with it. So inside here, is where we're going to render all the images. Right, they're all going to go in there. So what we want to do is set up the UI for that. I'm going to just populate it with a bunch of static images for now, just for convenience. So let's create a row here. Let's do 3s here, okay. And right here, let's insert one sort of static image just to get something tested, right? So let's see, image src. Let's see here. I'm going to find something from Reddit.
placeholder.cats.
Yeah.
Or what?
Just a picture of a dog or a cat or something. So. Okay, this will do. Just whatever. Okay, so then let's use that for now. If you have your own preference, do whatever you want to do. And then let's see how that looks over here. Okay, obviously, it's way too big, right? So let's scale that guy down. So let's do style, width, and 100%. So here, I'm using a different unit of measurement. Rather than pixels, I'm specifying percentages. So to do that, you just put it in the quotation mark right there.
Could you use like M or RAM?
You can use whatever you want. If you don't specify, pixels is the default. Okay. And then let's put in, I don't know, 3 or 4 of these. Okay, so it's just a couple sample images to work off of. So now, our Instagram feed will show up here, okay? Okay, how's it going so far? Now, what we want to do is track the current feed in the state. So if I go back up to the state, I can create an initial feed, which is an empty array. There's nothing there yet, so it's an empty array. Make sense? Because when you initially load the project, there's no request having been made yet. Okay? If we go back to the actual Instagram data, it is now time to parse this data to extract the feed and then use it to render the images. You with me? So all the way on top, we have a user key, which is pretty much like the main key. Everything's inside there. And then inside that, we have a media key, which looks like it has a nodes array. What I'm going to do to make life easier is clean up this on the back end, parse all that out on the back end for the benefit of the front end. Does that make sense? So let's go back to the the Instagram route here. And let's do all that parsing over here. Right? So what do we want here? We want the user. Right, that's all the way on top. And then within that, we want the media key. And then within that, we want the nodes array. And each one of these is the actual image feed, right? So const feed equals user what was it? User dot media dot nodes. And let's return that right here, like that. So that we're basically doing the parsing on the back end to save time. Or just to do it on the back end rather than the front end is basically it.
How is it getting when you're saying const feed equals user media? So user is the it's an object.
Yeah, so all the way on top is this guy right here, user. And then within that there's a key called media. And then within that there's a key called nodes. That's what we want, right? So now if I reload this, you see how it just gives me the feed and nothing else? Like we stripped out all the stuff we don't want. Or not all of it, but some of it, right?
How do you use the last part?
Right here on line 22 and right there.
So now we made a request from backend.
We went back to the back end, right? I probably should have done this before swinging back to React, but kind of just sort of improvising, so sorry. Basically, we're cleaning up the feed for the sake of the front end, right? Now, we've made some progress there, but there's still a lot of junk here I just don't want. Like this media preview, the owner, thumbnail. Actually, I do want that. Basically, the only thing I do want is the thumbnail and the caption. That's essentially it. Everything else, well, we don't care about. All right, so here we have the thumbnail SRC and the caption. Let's only get that so we don't have to worry about that on the client side. All right, so over here, let's do let parsed. Let's go through all of this. And inside that parsed array, let's push image, which is going to be the post. And I believe it's thumbnail SRC. This guy right here, you can just copy that. And then the caption is just caption. And now our service should return the parsed array rather than the original array. It's giving us a cleaner data feed to work off of to make our life a lot easier client side. A fair question is, why would you do this client side versus server side? Like, what difference does it make? Why couldn't we just do this on the React side? We could. We could just do this on the React side. A key consideration, though, is if this is your server and you're returning all that data, just to parse and throw it away, why return all that data? Right? You're just spending bandwidth for no good reason. So at scale, that's a major consideration. Right? At that level, at scale, you have to think about that. Here, nobody's obviously on the site, doesn't matter, but those are the considerations. So if I go back here, now I have a much cleaner feed. Right? Image, caption, that's it. Is everyone with me? So we want to confirm that on the client side as well. So if I go over here and run the console and just type in whatever, now, well, it's hard to see, but it's the same feed. It's just cleaner. It's just less stuff to parse through. Good?
I have a question for the backend part.
Yep.
Just go back. Could you just go on? Yeah, to this, like, as I said, it promises, but it's not really promises. This all method set and query gets URL. This is custom methods, or this is somewhere from a library?
The library.
This is
Super
library.
agent library.
Super agent.
Correct. Yeah. Okay, so let's get rid of this. All right, good. So now let's go back to the React side, right? And we just happen to have a feed object sort of on standby in the state. So now what we can do is we can, over here, on line 33 for me, here is where the response is returned from our service, correct? And if you look at the actual JSON, JSON of that response, you'll see the top level key is feed. That's the payload. That's what we want, right? So what we do here is this dot set state feed, and just put that into the state. So now our state is successfully tracking the data feed from our backend, which is just proxying a request to Instagram. It's now inside of our state. Yep.
What about global data objects?
In what sense? Oh, yeah, you can do all that here. That's like the window, the DOM, all that applies. In fact, that gets heavily used, ironically, when you invoke server-side rendering. It gets very tricky with server-side rendering as well. So for example, the DOM doesn't exist on the server. So if you're calling DOM elements on the server, that'll crash the entire thing. So you have to know when you can use it and when you can't use it. It's a subtle touch. It's a good question though. Yeah, another question? Okay, so now we have our feed in the state. So this is no longer necessary. I'm going to remove all of them except one. And what we want to do is iterate through the feed and render this piece of text, piece of HTML or really JSX for every element in the feed. So what we want to do now is iterate it using the map function. So this.state.feed.map. Post. And then here we can return whatever JSX we want. Well, that's why I left this guy behind, so we can just copy and paste it in. Whenever you do this map iteration in JSX, you have to add a key attribute inside the top level div. It's hard to explain why, so I'm just going to lay off it. However, what matters is inside the post. That's what stores our post data, correct? And if you recall, when we set up our API, we put it inside the key called image, right? If you recall that. So what we want to do is get rid of this placeholder for now and do post.image. And it will hopefully render the image of the post from the feed, assuming we didn't make any mistakes. So let's give it a shot. Let's see how that goes. So if we go here, you can type in anything, right? Because it's hard-coded, and there it is. And we can cross-reference that with the actual feed from like literally Instagram.com, right? So right here's the actual feed, and here's what's loaded on my local host. Same thing. Good?
No. It's funny that it worked. Well, I mean, not funny for you, but
Okay.
I just didn't expect it.
Oh, okay. So, I mean, if you don't have it working, here's the code. Give it. Who does have it working? Just offhand. Okay. Yeah, take a few more minutes, get this working, and then we'll move on to the next thing. Who can guess what the next thing is?
Styling images.
Yeah, we can do some of that. But keep in mind, right now, it's only returning one data feed. Which one? The YMCA. It's not quite dynamic, right?
Oh, so like different users?
Yeah, let's get that part working next, so we can actually it matters what we type in, and then we can style
Like
it.
an engine, like a search engine, to make the request.
Yeah, exactly.
And get the data according to this request.
Right. I mean, we set it all up, right? We may as well use it. It's ready. We may as well take advantage of it, right? So let's try it out. If we go to the Instagram.js route, as you'll see on line 7, it's hard-coded. That's, it's not really what we're going for here. So let's get rid of that. And then right here is where the dynamic element is supposed to be. So that's going to be rec.params.username. So rec.params.username. Now for tonight, I'm not going to do any like validation or like making sure the username exists or it's not private or anything like that. So there's going to be a lot of edge cases for different usernames that I'm just not going to get into, okay? So basically what I'm saying is please use a username that you know exists, is essentially what I'm asking. So we don't have to debug all these crazy like private accounts and things like that. Does that make sense? So if you don't know any Instagram people, another example is that I use all the time is this one right here. Okay, guaranteed to exist. Okay, so we'll test against these two. All right. So right here in the account route, the Instagram route, we are now leveraging the username actually entered into the text field. Right. So
This is nice to hydrate, right there in water. Exactly.
So here is my initial test. That still works, very nice. And now let's test the other one.
It's gonna be beer.
That works. So we're good to go.
It's beer, sorry guys.
Okay, so no problem.
Thank
It's not a requirement for this class.
you.
Yeah, just me, I wish I could.
So again, there's a lot of like edge cases I'm just not even covering for. Like if the username doesn't exist, if it's private, I don't really know what's going to happen, to be honest. So that's why I said just find a couple of users you know will work for now, and then just make sure you can get it to work over here. How's that working on your end? Who has it? Give me a thumbs up, thumbs down. I think the
Can
percentage
we
is...
ask you questions after?
Oh, please, yeah, you can ask right now.
I'm getting
The more the better.
I mean, not like the React question for this application, but in general React.
Yeah, sure. Ask whatever you want. It's for the sake of the video. Other people who are watching this video right now on YouTube are wondering the same things. This is going to go on YouTube.
Oh, yeah.
It's going to get a bunch of views.
That's cool.
They're going to ask the same questions you're thinking right now. So if you have any questions, please let me know.
This is about course.
Okay.
Do you hear about course package?
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, that I'll do after the video.
Right. No.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Okay. How are you guys doing?
I'm not getting images to load, but everything on it is like there's
All right. Well, let's keep working on it. Let's get the debugging to go. So Matt, help out with the debugging.
Yeah, all you need, you just need a little bit more beer.
I'm on it.
Actually, I'm gonna have one too.
This one.
Yes, I mean it's
Beer
everything
fixing.
is fine. I'm getting console. Oh wait.
So, meanwhile, could we talk about course?
Sure. So I have 3 primary offerings. I have a 2 nights a week course starting December 5th. There are 2 tracks there. There's an intro web class, which no one in this room is going to need. And then there's the React Redux class. You can think of this tonight as like a sample class, except it moves slower. In a sample class, I make sure everyone keeps up. We guarantee. I hire a TA and everything. I don't let people fall behind. That's 2 nights a week, December 5th through December 28th, Tuesdays and Thursdays, 6 to 9 p.m. Okay, that's one option. The other option is I do a weekend crash course, which is a bit more of a balancing act. I do a React Redux weekend crash course. The next one is December 9th and 10th. That's 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. Saturday and Sunday. Oh, the prices. That one's $500, and the 4-week course is $1,200, unless you pay in full. If you pay in full, there's a $200 discount.
Could I send this information? Could I send you my request by email and just get all this information?
Yeah, it's all on the website. It's all right
all
here.
in there.
It's all right here. So if you go here, all right here, courses.
Cool.
So everything I'm articulating, it's all right there.
Nice.
So the first one I described is this one right here, but this is too easy for everyone in this room. The next one is this one right here. Essentially, we're doing we've gone a little bit further than lesson 1 of this class, but we would do it in a much slower, deliberate fashion in this class. Obviously, the demo is a different environment, right? And then the weekend crash course, which is actually not on this page, I'm sorry, it's on this page, workshop. So that's what I call that a workshop. The weekend crash course are down here. It's a little bit different. You really got to gauge whether or not you're ready to move at a blistering pace. The last weekend crash course we did was full of all professional developers. And I just 3rd to 4th gear all the time. And even then I didn't feel like I had enough time. So you figure out what you think is most suitable. And how are we doing on this? You guys got this working?
This is the code again.
The Instagram feed. That's it.
Certainly worth going into what I would cover in the class that I'm not getting into here. All of this should be done through a Redux architecture, which is certainly not happening here. Routing through all of this through Redux will take about 3 full demos on its own. Right, so that's why I can't really do an effective Redux demo. However, in this environment, what we're seeing here, like I said, that's kind of what I was pointing out a few minutes back, saying this is not best practice. So if a professional React developer was watching this video, he would be, or she would be like, "Oh my God, I can't believe he's doing it that way." I completely understand that, and he'd be correct. So I'm just pointing that out. This really should be done through a React Redux architecture, done through a series of what's called actions, which manipulates what's called reducers. Okay? I can't do that in a demo. I've tried. It doesn't work. I've given that up. So that the classes would get into that in very granular detail. So,
Can you console log inside a return
where?
I guess like between 57 and 58.
No, but you can do it right here. Right here. And I do that a lot.
I never know.
It was before, right? So we changed the pictures.
Did you go to a boot camp?
Yeah, I'm actually a classmate.
Oh, nice. Yeah, we got
Together.
it's a boot camp wars.
Everybody from Boot
Yeah,
Camp?
we're from Galvanize.
I always wanted to do that, like a boot camp Olympics. Like just have everyone in. Like,
Not quite. We're gonna be done in about 10 weeks.
I want to make it like a real Olympics. I want like fights and stuff, like arm wrestling and everything, like
6 months. So yeah, it's crazy.
beer drinking, like dizzy bats. Like I want to get all into it. Yeah, forget the coding. Like I just want to see who's got the best,
So it's
you know,
not
dizzy bat players.
Yeah,
Right?
it's-
So
Every day.
every day.
Every day. Yeah. It's intense.
6 months. Oh, that class was 6 months and we learned a lot. You had what, three and a half? It was rushed every time. You had to code probably like 12 hours a day. You don't have weekends. You don't have
It's
just
exhausting.
completely deep.
What's the problem, John?
It's saying map is undefined.
It's, you start really feeling exhausted.
Make sure your feed is defined on the initial load right here, line 10. You may have missed that.
Yeah.
So my error messages can set headers out. After there's
I
can
just
set
found
headers out.
So over here on the Instagram route, you have a res.json twice in there somewhere. And that shouldn't be happening.
So you went to John Sumlin?
Yeah,
How was that experience?
it was great, but we deleted
No, it was fine.
yeah, two months, just
What about you, John? Was that it?
No, it's still cheating.
more experience, but it's kind of you just finish making your application for I don't know whatever JS Express. You jump to React very quick, and after React, you finish your application with React and Express, and you jump to the Rails, which you actually completely just messed up everything because it's like very long transition between like something that's used to work on before and it's completely Rails.
So I console log the
Okay, so just to reconfirm, I'm going to just run it one more time. So we have 14th Street Y. Good, that's the correct feed. And then here's another one. Good, so it worked. So now we have feeds loading dynamically. I mean, we may as well use it since we have it. Let's just start on the caption because it's there. So let's go ahead and use it. So I'm going to make this width 70 to give some more room. I'm going to do a BR. Oh, by the way, you see this right here? This will crash the entire project. So you have to close all tags. This right here is an unclosed tag. Every tag must be closed. So make sure you close all tags. Okay, we included the caption in the API, so we may as well use it, right? I mean, why not? And let's see how that looks. All right. I mean, the space is a little bit, it's not optimal, but it worked. So that's nice. It'll be back in a second. Okay. Everyone got that?
What was the last thing you put?
The caption inside of a small tag, which apparently isn't all that small. Let me make it even smaller.
Yeah, it's kind of small.
Font size, let's go with 10 on this. Yeah, a little bit better. Obviously, there's a lot to be desired with the styling and whatnot. I don't think that's really the main reason for this demo, but I'm sure you can understand that. How are we doing so far? Yeah. Okay, last but not least, let's send this guy up. So go back to your Turbo account and log in. Let's create our project right here. So create app. So Instagram feed. Okay, and then click create. So make sure you have that. Okay, once doing so, our app ID is what we need. This is our unique identifier on the platform. So we grab that, just copy it. Go back to your terminal, turn off the server, and we do turbo, app, and then paste it in. This connects our local source code to our remote project. So everyone do that right now. It's kind of like connecting a GitHub repo to your remote. It's basically the same idea. And then we do turbo, deploy, and we wait. So now this is currently being deployed to the turbo architecture, which is free hosting on staging if you want it. And that's basically it. These take a little bit longer to deploy because the React Redux build has to go with it. So all those modules have to go with it. It's kind of a pain.
So you don't need to like make it pre-built first before it's deployed.
You can, but Turbo runs the build for you anyway because a lot of people forget. And so I manually inserted a pre-build. That's why it's taking a while. And then it'll go up. And
So
that's
you
it.
don't need run builds.
You don't have to.
You don't have it.
Yeah. It's happening right now.
So if, for example, you have some error deployed, how do you know that? Does Turbo say you something?
I think I might have one right now. This is taking unusually long. It's usually done by now.
Mine button.
Okay. Well, then hit the endpoint. It should give you a URL. Just hit that. Make sure it shows up. If the build doesn't work, it'll crash in the build process. And it won't
say
go.
you something that's you crashed because of.
Yeah, it's a standard npm run build, so it's not like a turbo specific process. I just see it's happening right here.
Yeah, I see. You know it. So.
Because so many people forget that I was just like, screw it, I don't want to take any chances. It does it for you. If you're curious, I built this entirely on serverless architecture, AWS Lambda. So we're running all of our websites through AWS Lambda. That's what I built it on. That's it. So it works. Basically, your website or my website here is just running a series of lambdas that serves the site, literally serves the website. So if I go here, I invoked 2 lambdas right now to make this run. Let's try it out. So 14.3y. There it is. So it worked on staging, and we're good to go. Okay, we got that working.
I'm just my image is still uploaded, but the text is.
Okay. Oh, you don't see the images, but you do see the text.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it gives me the links to
Okay. Well, I'm sure it's just a simple bug that you can figure out.
They're probably right. It's in the
Gotcha. Okay, so like I was saying, this video will be up tomorrow morning with the corresponding source code. So you can, if your code just isn't working, the code that I literally wrote here will be alongside with it. Actually, Max, this is worth pointing out. You see how this is blue over here? That means it's running a production build, right? Not a development build. However, I never actually invoked the production build. The whole night I've been using a development build. In other words, the deployment process took care of that for you. Because, like I said, I don't want to take any chances. People get careless. I get careless. Whatever. The development build is like 6 times as big as the production build. So eventually that ends up on my bandwidth, right? Like Turbo, I own Turbo. Everything runs through my account. So if people are unoptimizing their code, I'm paying for that. So I'm covering for that. It's like I'm protecting people against themselves, essentially.
So if you have this like blue and black icon, it means this is a production. This is not.
Correct. Let me show you a development build. So here we are in WeWork. That's a development build. They're running React here using a development build. If you go on Instagram itself, obviously it's Facebook. They're running the production build. That's how you tell. Right? I'm not really sure why WeWork is running a development build, but they are. The development build bundle size, again, is literally like 6, 7, 8 times as big as a production size. So, if I have like 10,000 projects on Turbo all running a development build, that's a lot of bandwidth I'm just throwing away for no good reason. So I cover that for you until I raise $10 million and I don't care. You can deploy wherever the hell you want. But until then, it's coming out of my pocket. So I need to make sure everything's pre-optimized. So yeah, before I shut down the video and turn it all down, any questions, anything you want me to clarify, anything you want to go over again real quick?
Do you have a specific way how you connect your front end with back end?
I'm sorry, one more time?
Do you have a specific module? Do you use specific module to connect your front end with your back end?
Model.
Module.
Oh, just Bootstrap. I straight conventional. I don't stray too far from the norm. So just Bootstrap, regular HTML, CSS. I use Less to compile my CSS. I've used Sass before too.
And I don't see a server like this. We don't have a server
Serverless.
on the back end. Serverless. That's why.
Right.
Have a server file.
Yeah. So if you're interested in the architecture, there's a lot more I can go into it. What's happening here when you run localhost is you're running a Node Express project. And that's why it should have been a rather comfortable environment for you development-wise. But Node Express is a server framework. It's kind of like Ruby on Rails. It's a server framework, same as Python Django. When you deploy to Lambda, there are no servers. It's literally serverless.
Could you show Lambda in the code here?
No, that's a whole nother, right? However, so what I had to do was I had to create a series of abstractions that run Express APIs in a Lambda environment. That is Turbo. That's what Turbo does for you. So when you deploy your project onto Turbo, it's all these Express APIs running via Lambda abstractions that I wrote over a period of about 3 months. And that's what I did. It was a fun time. So that's what's happening on the DevOps side. What I find though is that most sort of software devs don't really care about that. They're more interested in learning, React and Node and Express and all that stuff. And that's why my demos are more pointed towards that. Which, if you take one of my courses, it's an orgy of just React. We just get into it for, the weekend crash courses. I don't even want to take lunch. The students have to break for lunch. I just want to get through it 8 hours and get in, get it out, so that we have time. So, if you're a glutton for punishment, take one of my weekend courses, because just imagine this times 3. That's what I do. Matt, you were there. They have to say, we need a break, right? So I can do this nonstop, to be honest. Any other questions?
I know before I asked you about that, the console log. So what are the restrictions for where you can and can't console log?
In what sense?
Well, you said I don't console log inside the return statement because I know some places you can't use like console.
So
logs.
okay, so here inside the return statement, you're not really within the confines of the function. This is rendered code. So this isn't really running any functions or anything like that. You're just rendering HTML. So think of it this way. Imagine trying to do a console log inside of HTML code. What would happen? Right, exactly. It's a similar thought process. So that's a good
So
question.
yeah, like inside of JSX, as long as it's within the brackets, then it's
Yeah, and the return basically means you're now beyond the confines of the actual function, and you're just rendering HTML now, essentially. So if I do a console log in here, it's going to try and render that console log. Does that make sense? Just like HTML would. Okay, that's a tricky one. Any other?
yeah. One more thing. So
Yeah.
so the keys with the I, like I know that's just something that React requires, right? It just that's how it keeps track of all the.
Well, I mean, there is a reason. So the reason is that if and when you ever get to server-side rendering, what React does is it pre-renders your components on the server. Each one of those components are assigned a unique ID called the key. And then on the client side, here I can just literally show it to you.
Couldn't it react to this implicitly? Why put that on the user?
I don't ask. I don't make the rules. I just play by them. So here I'm rendering React code on the server. This is all server-side rendered. So if I go to here, you notice how our project that we made tonight didn't have any of this code in it. It was just basically an empty div tag, right? Well, now that's not the case. Here, you see where it says ID root over on line 42, all the way to the left, right? That's the same as our root. However, there's a ton more stuff inside. That's the pre-rendered code.
I see a data React ID. There.
Correct. That's the key. And then what happens is on the client side, it uses those keys to match up the client-side rendering with the server-side rendering. If they don't match, there's a problem. It'll say your client-side and server-side stuff don't match. So you need to fix that.
It's
And
like
that-
it's like all over the place.
It is now because React is taking over the world. So you're seeing this everywhere. So, I mean, that's just true. That's a good question. Any other questions?
How do you use to test React components?
Testing components is the component testing is a bit of a bitch. It's the library from Airbnb. I can't remember the name. Enzyme. Thank you. That's for component testing. That seems to be the industry standard, from what I gather.
Do you do that though? Or is it
I don't do that because component testing to me is that's way too that. I'm not that crazy.
Honestly, I mean, even though it's simple app though, I kept running into these issues where it's man, I had to think 3 or 4 steps ahead.
No, I do a lot of reducer testing. So I do testing in state because the data maintenance is what matters more to me. Because I change my components every hour of every day. I'm just changing components all the time. But the reducer has to be, the integrity of the reducer is what matters the most. And that's where Redux comes in. Unfortunately, we didn't even touch that tonight. But so my tests are heavily wrapped around the reducers. And I do a lot of testing through that. But component testing, if you do that, then get on you. It's pretty intense stuff. I don't do that. Cool. So yeah, I think the last thing I want to kind of leave you at is, I'm